Hello, Tyler Bryden here. I hope everything is going well. Excited to have you here joining me today. A lot of stuff to go through as always. I like the weekly cadence that I'm on recording these videos instead of just trying to pump out a video per day. You get the week to process the information, see what's going on in the world, see the trends that are sticking, the stories that are resonating, and then jump on the ones that truly interest me, resonate with me, and that I hopefully have some insight or perspective on, or at least I think are worthwhile sharing. What do we got here today? I'll spend just a minute. The USA versus Canada final. I'll just lightly touch on it. I'm Canadian. It was a great moment, especially with all the stuff going on between US and Canada. Interesting rumblings that have just come out over the last, I would say, couple days between an interview with Satya Nadella, a big tweet by Gavin Baker, a big private and public investor, and then some reports about Microsoft pulling back on some of the data center leases that they've been putting in place. One of these questions around, is there some pullback happening? Is there some signal of an oversupply in the data centers versus the demand? Or is there just some optimization of these technologies that means maybe not as much compute power is required? We'll dive into that before I get too excited. I've got this interesting chart about the trend of Canadian happiness, and I wonder what you think, if it's going up or down right now and over the last decade. I'll hit it with the double Canadian story, one which is this new train project in Canada, one that I think we've seen over and over again, and some controversy coming out of that very quickly, so we'll jump into that. We've got Ruby Dhalla, who paid a fee and was generating enough attention and money to be able to officially join the next Canadian Liberal political race to be the next Prime Minister of Canada. She was forced out. A lot of controversy here and some, I think, parallels to what we saw down in the US. Originally forcing Bernie Sanders out of the party, but then RFK, Tulsi Gabbard, and not even the first time with Liberals in this cycle. Now then we've got this email from Elon, what have you done this week? Which was a meme that's now been put into place, and that's continued in this Doge efforts. Apparently Trump continuing to push Elon to do even more, even with all the pushback and the anger that's taking place on those efforts to limit government spend. A couple other things going on. We got some weird things going on. Mark Carney finances. Kash Patel was confirmed. There was the CPAC convention, so that's a conservative convention down in the US. I'm getting messed up watching this show Dark. I don't think I'm going to talk about it. It's too dark, to be honest. We got Severance continuing to go. We've got the Javier Milei meme coin. And then on a personal note, I just hit 5 months sober, so some interesting changes in my life. I don't think we're going to get through all that docket, but those are a couple things in my head. If I don't get through them today, they might just be lost in the abyss, or maybe I can revisit in a future episode if they're still relevant still. But let's jump into this. I said I'll only take a minute on this. This was the Four Nations game. Canada winning this. Spoiler if you didn't see it. And here's the moment. So just a little victory lap. I'm not too much, again, of a sports fan, to be honest. I love playing sports, but I don't watch it. But this was exciting, and there were some stats about, I think, 15 million people watching this game. So a huge event for hockey. I know people said, that's less than an average NFL game. But for hockey, that's pretty damn exciting. And there was obviously a lot of national pride on both sides of this game and some pretty high stakes. And it was great to see the players themselves care about this. Some of them talking about just how big of a game it was. And then there was some side stories here. You know, McDavid, who scored this game winner, probably considered the best NHL player, best hockey player in the world right now. His childhood hero was Sidney Crosby, who famously scored the golden goal to win the Canadian Olympics. McDavid then coming and scoring this goal. So that was a pretty beautiful moment. No matter who you're cheering for and what you like, there's this storyline, this narrative of Crosby passing the puck, if it would be the metaphor, to the next generation of hockey players. And man, what a stacked lineup we've got there, if we consider that. Nice shot of McDavid here. We've got the boys celebrating in the dressing room after the game, and then a great shot here that Sidney Crosby when he scored, the gloves coming off, and then McDavid, another great shot of him there, the golden goal that won the first Four Nations. I think just a very exciting moment. Sports, it's almost a simulation of war. And in a way, that's something that's happening between Canada and US with all these trade tariff discussions, all these pieces that are Pretty astounding. And I even saw a stat that 25% of Canadians consider Americans to be the enemy now, which I do not fit into that camp. I think it's a super sad thing to feel that generally the polite, apologetic Canadian, a pretty substantial part of our population, feels that way. But when I discussed this in the last video, it's pretty minimal participation in this. And yes, we could say, hey, we voted for this, and so these are the consequences of this, whether US or Canadian. But I think most people don't necessarily choose these things at this high level arena that's being played through politics to take place. And there's a lot more commonalities than differences between the people here. And I think one of the big moments that I saw just in that, I think just to close out, was when the game was in Canada, there was the national anthem for the US anthem. I love the US anthem, first of all, but Canadians booing that anthem. On the reverse, in this final game here, the game was in the US. It was in Boston. Boston, obviously a very rowdy crowd. Canadian anthem came on. I heard some boos at the very beginning, but by the end, Americans and Canadians were singing the Canadian anthem. And I just thought that was a beautiful moment and pretty profound. I don't know, I felt disappointed in Canadians when we booed that, and then a lot of love and respect for Americans when they didn't boo the Canadian anthem there. So I want to thank you for that. I felt when two people are in a relationship and one of them is finally deciding I'm going to be the grown-up here, and in that case, the Americans did that. And frankly, I felt a little embarrassed as a Canadian to see the booing, and then for them to come back. It was like them being a grown-up, but like the most like boss thing you could do is, no, we're not going to boo you. We're going to sing alongside you. And so again, I think that was a meaningful moment, and hopefully a little bit of a wake-up call for Canadians here and how we're perceiving it. And I guess some people say, hey, they're the aggressor, but I just feel like, again, there's too much in common here for us to let this fray a population that's lived side by side, I would say peacefully, for a long time. Obviously, there's some history that shows that's not always true, but still in recent memory and for all of our most recent generations, peace and great partners. I won't harp on that anymore. I think this was a great culmination of that. Great to see Canada come out with that victory. Although I will say, that was the big game that there was to win, but I know as a sports person, like when I go into a series. So I'm playing my one friend in squash right now. So we play a series of 7. He wins 4. I win 3. I haven't beat him yet, but Canada, they played 2 games. Canada win 1, US win 1. In my heart, I feel like another game needs to be played to settle it. But I'm okay with people saying, hey, that was the finals. That was the game that mattered. And in this moment, Canada won. I do think that's a beauty of the 7-game series, especially in hockey, where you do see the true best team emerge at the end of it. So a great rivalry that is formed. It's always been one in hockey, but with all the stuff going on in the world, that was just heightened and just made for very exciting hockey there. So I'll close that out with that shot. So probably be jumping back and forth a little bit between Canada, some of these other topics today, but I thought this one was just such a fascinating one to jump into, considering how much money, how much excitement has been pushed into AI, all of this technology here. And Satya, who has been, I think, very transparent, a huge leader, obviously, in the space, early into OpenAI, early into all of this, but then just coming onto podcasts and talking like very openly and honestly about Microsoft's plans, the technology, the larger picture as a whole. And so my disclaimer is I haven't been able to watch this whole thing, but I've been following some clips, some of the discussion on this video and this conversation as a whole. But conversation got connected with some questions around Microsoft's belief in the full future of AI and what that looks like. And then this tweet from Gavin Baker here, again, who's an intelligent investor. He's been on the All In podcast, and so you can see him in conversation there, but talks about, this is a long tweet. I know people are used to these little quick hits on Twitter or X, whatever. And so when you see something this long, then you start to say, okay, maybe I'm not going to read this. But it talks about One Piece. It seems Satya shares this belief, hence opting out of the $160 billion of pre-training, this massive build, and some cancellations on data centers, and this overbuild that maybe underplaced, that everyone got caught up in this massive excitement. And we saw $80 billion from all these top Meta, Amazon, Microsoft, allotting huge amounts of their CapEx to these data center build-outs, and questioning, okay, is the pushback coming from investors who say that's too much to spend on CapEx? Are they seeing an early signal that the AI isn't as meaningful as it should be? or that it's not as expensive through some of these innovations, maybe ones that we saw at DeepSeek to be able to do things much cheaper. And again, we know there's all this confusion and mix up there, but it seems like through this main process, there is still huge room for optimization to decrease costs. And this is a worthwhile read if you are interested in sort of the AI technology space, or if you're just participating in the markets where this narrative of AI has been a driver of growth in the entire market, leading to a huge lift up in all-time highs in the stock market, often driven by these technology companies, PE ratios expanding, and some of these very, maybe some would describe as frothy valuations here. I've seen other sides of SoftBank's investment in OpenAI starting to have a little bit of concern. And then a couple just other notes. Okay, if these data centers required, is it specifically about the pre-training and training of these models, or is it more compute layer? And again, can that compute layer become more efficient? And then one last note about these extremely compute intensive reasoning models, which in a lot of cases I think are showing value, and deep research being one of the leading indicators of this. But in a lot of cases, like booking travel, you don't need a reasoning model, or in most cases, artificial general intelligence is not required for a more simple task like this. So what we'll see is continued this idea of mixture of experts, or automatic routing to models that are doing the task based on the actual compute requirement or the complexity of the task. So huge room for optimization, as we generally see with technology, and even participating in this space, the cost profile has gone down, whether for us it's been transcription or these AI models to hook into an API and do some of this analysis. It's just huge difference. And then when you throw a bunch of competitors in that arena, and then even open source being part of it, that adds even more. This was relatively fresh. Microsoft canceling these data center leases, and they've terminated select leases with at least 2 private data center operators around the world. This has been done before. Meta had canceled a CapEx program. And I think there's still a lot of details coming from this, but Microsoft may consider itself in an oversupply position. They've walked away from at least 5 land parcels, pausing construction in Wisconsin. And we'll see this start to play out, if it's true, if it's accurate. But just with Microsoft, with such a massive budget, massive insight, both in their own Azure cloud operations, and then obviously with their partnership with OpenAI, have such an early signal on all of these things. Satya was so early in the beginning, and now is starting to see that little bit of a shift, maybe towards pulling back. So super fascinating. Maybe this is truly the demand isn't there. Maybe that model's work isn't as meaningful. Companies aren't seeing the ROI, or maybe there's just huge optimization of how we're doing these things. And so the data center requirements are much lesser. However, I still think that pushback is that paradox. As things become cheaper, you expect more usage. And that was something that Satya has said before when criticism has come towards this CapEx spend. And now we're seeing a conflicting message here. Okay, so we're back into Canada. What's going on? I talked about this graph of Canadian happiness. The title of the graph, happiness in Canada, is declining. And you can see there's a breakdown of ages here. As I've been posting these videos and they get, cut up into little TikToks and shorts and stuff, there's been a lot of engagement, and I appreciate that engagement, but there's been a lot of pushback. Even if I take a semi-conservative stance, or even if I go the opposite, I try to steelman the more liberal, left, progressive side. I often try to straddle both sides and try to reason through that. Reasoning with this head is a difficult task, but I do my best. And so I get a lot of comments. And what is fascinating, this chart cut through that noise for me, because at a core level, we're seeing the happiness score, and maybe that's subjective, but I think that's a pretty good signal of where you're self-rating yourself and how you're perceiving the economy, perceiving your opportunities, your health. This is a pretty clear signal that first of all, that there's a divide. If you look 16 over, it's moving up. But if you look at 16 under, those are pretty stark drops, especially age 30 to 59. Interesting I guess I'm looking right now here at that last few years where there's been some flattening, especially that below 30. But generally that trend, there is quite a bit of dispersion in some places. But at the core, you start to see that 2013 number come up where there seems like there was some highs. And then 2014, 15 starts to drop. And now, okay, maybe below age 30, there's a bit of leveling out. And above 60, there's some happiness. And I think there are some great studies about our happiness increases as we get older and we start to figure out life a little bit more, and maybe you have more assets and things like that. But that middle bracket, 30 to 59, continues to trend down. And overall, just looking at that score, 15th in the 24 World Happiness Index, down from 5th in 2015. Like, I just remember Canada always being one of the best places to live and people being so happy about being Canadian. And I'm not going to repeat myself about all the pride and all that stuff. It makes me sad. But this is one of the worst declines that we've seen globally. For those under 30, Canada now ranks 58th. We're supposed to be considered one of the leading nations in the world. We have some of the best nature, some of the best resources, the education levels, all these things. And we're 58th in happiness. Is this subjective? Have we gone soft? And these are first world problems? Or is it true? Is it these affordability crises, the lack of housing, the limited opportunities, the wage suppression while inflation skyrockets? Are all these things just eating away at Canadians' happiness and showing up in a chart like this? And like often I say, it's a bit of both. But we can see similar alignments there in GDP. Obviously, when you feel productive, when you feel your economy is growing, when you feel your assets are growing and appreciating, that's something that's meaningful in happiness. I think Canadian dollar depreciation has been something that's disappointing for a lot of us here. Canadian dollars was equivalent or even at sometimes been above the US dollar. And it also speaks to some of those videos and charts that we've talked about in previous episodes or whatever the hell this is, where there's a huge dispersion about how people are voting. If you're happy, then you're probably going to keep the status quo together. And that's why we're seeing a lot of people over the age of 60 remain liberal or even choose NDP, whereas generations below that are seeking change and are looking to alternative parties, and in this case, generally the Conservative Party, because we could say, yes, there's the Quebecois or there's the People Parties of Canada, but those are still, I would say, a little bit fringe, and it's just so hard, even though we don't have the two-party system that the US has, a lot of the attention and the funding flows to the conservatives and the liberals. Maybe it makes you grateful what you used to have. I know a lot of people hated Stephen Harper. I was a little early in my time of my political engagement, but I know my mom, who was an accountant, always talked about him and his focus on balancing the budget, which is a huge contrast to what we've seen with Trudeau and the Liberal Party here. And I guess there is a bigger connection to the economy and the country's health financially and people's overall happiness than maybe all this socialist overtaxed agenda, this post-national agenda, if I have to keep harping on that term, that's taking place. So a lot of younger people wanting change, sometimes still within, I would say, the confines of the Liberal Party. And so this was another story that came out this week, this Ruby Dhalla. Now, I don't know much about this person, to be honest. So again, there's my disclaimer at the top of this. She was making a lot of noise, was running to be the next Liberal leader, and then ipso facto, that's how you say it? Prime Minister of Canada, and she was making a lot of noise. She had some policies that people would say were not liberal. She was attacking Mark Carney and liberals within her own party. There you go. You can see the World Economic Forum puppet, and then Ruby and the memes were coming out. So there was a big deadline here this week. You had to raise $350,000, and then you could go into the official race. So she raised the money. Great. But then finds out that she has been disqualified from the leadership race. Now, this isn't the first time this has happened in this cycle. There was another person who was running, and I should know the name there. He was a male candidate, and as soon as he started to get some attention, disqualified. Now the same thing with Ruby as well. So I mentioned this at the start, but there is this huge parallel to what I saw in Canada, to what I saw again, first with Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton blocking him out when he was, I think, the clear population choice for a party to be the leader of the Democratic Party in the USA. And then we saw the same thing with RFK. We saw the same thing with Tulsi Gabbard we're now seeing, as Trudeau has resigned, the beacon is now Mark Carney, and anyone who's possibly throwing any friction on that is being picked out of the race on these conditions. Now, they're talking about campaign violations and financial risks and things there. Some of these things may be true. I don't know all the details on this. There's a pretty huge criticism here, I think, even when we look at Mark Carney, first of all, who hasn't exposed his own financial interest, and he seems to have a lot of these and probably a lot of conflicts. And then he has not even been an ordinary Canadian citizen in terms of being there in 183 days of the year. So he shouldn't even be a possible candidate either. And some very clear conflicts. I think it speaks to what we see in this tweet and even how they're discussing it. They kicked her out because she was a threat to Carney, and she didn't seem afraid. She definitely seemed willing to expose some topics that are things that definitely the Liberal Party doesn't want other people thinking about and hearing, especially if it comes to debate or if more and more attention comes to her as she becomes more close to a chance at becoming the Liberal leader. So pretty crazy moment. I think this is going to backfire, as always, on the people who are trying to uphold their power against the will of the people. I don't think she was probably going to win against Carney, but the fact that they didn't even have debates, it feels like that same thing when Biden stepped down and they just brought Kamala in without any process, and then in the end obviously suffered a pretty devastating defeat to Donald Trump there. I think we're going to see it seems like he's not going to be able to beat Pierre and the Conservatives, and even the Liberals are talking about this debate. First, do they try to make this election happen as quick as possible? And the concern there is the more that people learn about Mark Carney, the more that they're going to realize that he is this WEF puppet, his history in England, all these things. And again, the more he talks, the more it just becomes clear. It just doesn't seem to me a very well-intentioned person with Canada's true success in mind. It seems like Canada is a puppet of this larger global system, and Carney has been put in place to make that agenda happen because he has a Canadian citizenship and friends with all these guys and all these things. And we talked about it before. He's apparently the godfather of Chrystia Freeland's daughter or son or whatever. So they're all Spider-Man meme all pointing at each other. So there's the combination of that versus the other, which is, do they try to delay an election through some power grab, maybe brought on by emergency situation, by Trump's tariffs and things like that, and maybe that's why there's some disobeying of what Trudeau's doing, and even maybe the simple request that at least on the surface has been made, let's crack down on fentanyl and all these things. And I do understand the point that there's a lot of mixed messaging, and it seems like Trump and the American administration want more than that, but there's definitely some questions about how this is all installing Carney to be in power, and ideally he wants as much power as possible and as long as possible, and it's just the different strategies or paths that they're taking to achieve that. So speaking of some wonderful Canadian corruption, there was this great, seemingly on the surface, announcement that there's going to be a high-speed rail system. The trip would only take 4.5 hours. Some people said 3, and it takes Quebec all the way to Toronto. And then the details start to emerge. First of all, the cost of it, which is enormous, $40 billion plus. It's going to cost more than that. Then there's, one of these tactical announcements as a possible election to secure the support of Ontario and Quebec, obviously 2 of the more instrumental provinces for success in elections. But then a more nefarious part of this story comes out, which is Trudeau's high-speed rail is to be built by SNC-Lavalin, rebranded as Atkin Realis. For those who don't know, there's a huge scandal with SNC-Lavalin, engineering construction firm with the global infrastructure projects. There was some dealings in Libya. This company is not allowed to operate in a lot of countries now. And then there was some mafia-like relationships that come out of Quebec with SNC-Lavalin and Trudeau, and apparently a lot of protection given by the Canadian government. There's a deeper investigation that's been unveiled on this that puts Trudeau and his party in the cross sights of the legal system, because it just seems like what they were doing was not okay. But this company, a lot of leverage over the government, a money laundering organization in that way, rebrands and now gets rewarded with this project. And you can see the logo right there. The other thing to consider is he's resigning as prime minister. So like, should he be putting these projects together, allowing these projects when he is obviously not approved by the Canadian population, is literally on his way out? So just seemingly another way to launder money and give money to his buddy. I don't know, why do this? And of course, yes, maybe there was things in place already or in progress, and so it's just an announcement before he goes out of power. But he's this lame duck that no one supports. And when details like this that come out where it's so much money and so much corruption just embedded, it's just like, this almost needs to just be shut down right from the very start and then redone if we truly want to do this under a new process, and probably filter out companies like SNC-Lavalin, who have already done so much to destroy the trust of Canadians in that relationship with government and even just across the world. One more story we'll hit. Elon Musk says all U.S. federal employees will soon receive an email asking what have they done last week. They've got until Monday, 11:59 to answer this with 5 bullet points. Failure to respond will be taken as a resignation. And this was, I think, famously done in Twitter when Elon Musk bought it. I guess the question is, are they doing some time tracking and project management tool already? My guess is maybe a percentage of them, but a lot of them aren't. If you are doing that, then great. It's going to be very easy for you to summarize and create these few bullet points. I wonder what type of analysis is going to be done on these emails, because I think most people who are at least got into these positions are capable of bullshitting 5 bullet points about what they've done last week. So how do they check that? And it's obviously not the most efficient system, but a fascinating exercise for them to go through. So on Monday, 11:59, we'll see the outcome of this. And there was this guy that I've documented before, the meme lord tech. He created this little service, Elon Musk. If you want to partake in this, you get Elon's weekly email. He asks you, what have you done this week? And then no matter what you say, he says you need to do more. I thought that was a funny meme that this guy, sorry, I got some swearing up on the screen, that this guy put together and made some money off it. And I think Elon even follows him, and then ended up reinstating this process for the US government. So what else is going on? Again, I had a couple other points that I thought were worthwhile talking about. One, we had Kash Patel come in, and now it begins. Apparently, we have the Epstein files on day 1. We'll see if that happens. Another change agent that is coming into a very important organization in the United States with the opportunity and the will to disrupt it. A lot of pushback on him. I don't think they knew if he was going to get approved, but all of these picks, I believe, gone through, and he got the people in power that he wanted with a lot of disruption in mind. If I was just to sit back for a moment, reflect, maybe not think about the stories I did talk about at the start, this journey of sobriety now coming up 5 months, and I would say it's a great milestone for myself. Something that I'm proud to do. I feel much better. I'm getting much better sleeps, though I'm having a lot of dreams, and some of them are nightmares. And I was saying earlier at the start of this that I'm watching this show Dark. It's put me in this existential crisis about time travel and all these things, which I've watched the first season. It's a great show, but goddamn, the music and just the existential nature of it put me into a state of anxiety, and so my dreams are just now nightmares filled with a darkness. And I guess that's the thing that you take on when you watch a show called Dark. I'm going to continue that journey. It's not this commitment for lifelong sobriety, but it's definitely an acknowledgement of the possibility from someone who had partaken in specifically marijuana for a long time. Again, alcohol not being a problem, but that it is a healthy change. And say I move back even on an occasional enjoyment of that substance, that there is some great health benefits to testing a period of sobriety. And I will say there's an interesting subreddit called Leaves. It's people who are trying to specifically be sober from marijuana. And I think there's a lot of love around marijuana because it's an herb, because it comes from the earth, but then there's been so much genetic modification of it. And I talked to my dad, and people who were grown up with marijuana in Canada when it was obviously a much different time, but it was not as strong as it was now. And so there's a lot more problems with, I would say, marijuana usage because of the potency of it, the different types of ingestion, whether it's like high quality chocolates and gummies that taste good, or it's THC drinks where you can drink them and just mellow out, which is what got me towards the end. But what you can see also in this forum is just the back and forth mental battle that people are having with that substance, and this idea that, oh, marijuana isn't addictive. And yet you can see, just reading the people who are obviously posting, but then the comments, just how much pain and struggle is going on with people trying to leave this substance for whatever reason. And maybe, again, it's just an unhealthy relationship. I was talking to some friends last night about the negotiation that takes place when you are using marijuana. And sometimes you win that negotiation and you're using it in a positive way, and then sometimes you're not. And then I think there's also just a lot of now evidence and research coming out about the connection between marijuana and sleep. And for myself, the restfulness that has come, the energy that has come, I wouldn't say maybe it's concentration, because I do think one of the things that I love from marijuana is I could have some and then fall into a pit of curiosity and passion that could be pretty compelling, especially with the right dose, the right time, the right amount, and then obviously the right inspiration. But a lot of net benefits, feeling healthy. And as I continue this journey, hopefully I can share some more positive benefits, any insights that I've gotten along the way. It's something that I am definitely excited about and passionate about, especially in a world of overstimulation, abundance of opportunities for all different substances, and to just take a little bit of a break has been a nice thing. Caffeine, though, that's another story. I'm back on my chai, and that one's almost more difficult, I think. So vice with vice, things considered, still on an upward trajectory. And that concludes another video. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you have an amazing day ahead. And thank you, as always, for checking out these videos. I truly do appreciate it. I appreciate all the comments, all the engagement. It means a lot. It keeps me excited. It keeps me going, and it allows me to get some inspiration through the day-to-day realities of life, to carve out some time each weekend to put these videos together and share them out with you. So thanks so much again. Look forward to seeing you soon.